I would like to introduce our next speaker now, and in our program is his full bio, and I am not going to read it all. But I will tell you a couple things about our next speaker, General Tony Zinni. The thing that's important to me about Tony Zinni, to be quite honest, is that he's my friend. He's a great Marine. He was 2 tours in Vietnam, and he was on his second tour shot so that if you see him without a shirt in his back, he's zippered up in the back, and he was evacuated. Very heroic in Vietnam. And he went on to be the commander of all the forces in Somalia to bring him out after Black Hawk Down, an amazing operation. He was a commander at the U.S. Central Command, and I think he's one of the brightest minds that we have in our country today. And I'm so thankful that he came tonight to talk with you all, because he truly is somebody worth listening to. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome General Tony Zinni.
Please sit down. Please sit down. Well, it's always tough to follow Galloway, and I want to dispel the rumor that he first wore that distinguished cover at the Battle of Little Bighorn. I've heard that rumor going around. First of all, let me thank Mike Myatt at the Marines Memorial, AUSA, for putting this on. I mean, honoring our generation, Vietnam veterans. I want to take a different tone maybe than most of the talks you hear about us. We don't apologize for anything. There's nothing wrong with us and what we did and what we did afterward. You know, we are as much the greatest generation as the one that preceded us. You can look at those statistics. You can look at those statistics as to what we did. We not only fought this 10-year war with confused political direction and won every battle we were asked to win. You know, what did we do after that? We took the military out of the ashes of all sorts of things that Joe mentioned, and we rebuilt the finest military, won the Cold War, created the greatest economy that this nation has ever had. And every time you look at these statistics that you see that Mike has printed out, you know, we weren't the drug-ridden, homeless population. We ended up being far better than our counterparts. Why are there tens of thousands of people running around pretending to be Vietnam veterans? I haven't seen anybody pretend that they were at Woodstock, you know? You can't steal our valor. It's ours. We own it, just like Joe said. And we're proud of it. And our generation did as much, if not more, for this nation than any generation. And I would give you one example. In Washington, D.C., you know, almost every other day I drive by our memorial. It's the most visited memorial in Washington, D.C., more than any other. If you talk to the people that work there, the National Park Service, you know, they do a great job of trying to keep the memorials clean and polished and ready. It's not good enough for our generation. We have veterans and sons and daughters of veterans that come there with toothbrushes and scrub that wall to make it perfect. You know, I was there on Father's Day when we take roses and put them by every name and ask the families if they'll give us anything they want to say to who they lost. And we wrap them around the roses and put them there. There is no memorial in Washington, D.C. where those that were the buddies of those we lost care for it, tend to it, respect it. We are now building this center, this memorial center, that'll be next to it underground, that will tell the story of every person that was on that wall. And we've asked the families to contribute because we want them to be living representatives of what our generation, you know, really was all about. So that we have a generation, I really resent the fact that every time we talk about Vietnam veterans, there's some sort of apology, or we had a tough time, or the American public didn't understand what we did. We know what we did. We know what our buddies did. You know, we held them in our arms when they died. We know who's on that wall. We know that we contributed to the defeat of one of the greatest threats to our nation in the world. And in the end, the enemy collapsed. Why does Vietnam want to be more like us today? Why are they reaching out to us today? You know, and I think we've got to stand up as the veterans and part of that generation to say what we did. We saw more combat than our fathers did in World War II. The average grunt saw 240 days in a one-year tour, when the veterans of World War II saw 40 on average. And you never knew what was around the next corner. I sat in an event like this at a table, not realizing that next to me was a Medal of Honor recipient from World War II, a great American. And we were talking about Vietnam in a setting like this. And we were talking about the kinds of wars we've had since then. And he turned to me, and again, I didn't know who he was at the time, and he said, you know, I could not have done what you did. And he said, when we went into combat, we knew where the front lines were. We knew when we were going to have to gird our loins and go in and fight. We knew when that battle was over and we came back that we had a chance to rest. He says, spending a year or more in an environment that you didn't know what the next day brought, the next minute, the next second, would have been extremely difficult for me to handle. And I was shocked to learn this was one of the greatest heroes of our nation has ever produced. Again, a Medal of Honor recipient. The other thing that when I go down that wall at each panel and I look at it, I realize how young we were and how innocent we were going in. You know, there's a 15-year-old soldier on that wall. There are 5 16-year-old soldiers. There's a number of 17-year-old soldiers. The average is less than 23 years old. We went into that war extremely innocent. I remember as a second lieutenant getting my orders to Vietnam, first tour. I was assigned to be an advisor to the Vietnamese Marines, second lieutenant. I arrive in Saigon, get my tiger stripes, my beret. I was full of myself. I reported to the colonel, who looked at me and he said, a second lieutenant, what the hell am I going to do with you? There were less kind words about the Vietnamese Marine colonel, who I said, I'm here to advise you, you know. And my first assignment, as they were trying to figure out what to do with the second lieutenant, was to report to another great Marine who's not here today, now General Joe Hoare, retired, who was a captain. They said, we're going to send you down to work with Captain Hoare. He'll teach you what you need to do. So I said to the colonel, well, where do I go? He says, well, they're down in the Rung Sat Special Zone, which was a mangrove swamp south of Saigon. You know, they had to, the Viet Cong used to ambush the ships coming up, and the Vietnamese Marines on these small fiberglass boats interdicted the waterways and set up ambushes. You're going to go down and work with him. So I said, fine. I said, well, how do I get there? And he said, well, you go to Na Bay, which was a naval base, and they'll get you down to where they're located. So I walked out of the colonel's office and I ran into the first Vietnamese Marine, and I had been to Army Special Warfare School, the MATA course, and learned how to speak Vietnamese. And I said to the Vietnamese Marine, how do you get to Na Bay? And he said, you catch a bus to go down. So I walked and took a little Cicolo cab from our headquarters at Lê Thanh Ton. I went to the square where all the buses were. I looked for the one that said Nha Bay. I had my pack, my rifle, my Tui Quan Luk Chien, Vietnamese Marine Corps uniform, all brand new, and I got on the bus. And there were little old ladies with chickens and everybody else looking at me and, you know, really proud that pointed to the Tui Quan Luk Chien, you know, you're a Vietnamese Marine. And I took the bus to Nha Bay. I got off at Nha Bay, and I said, where's the naval base? And some of the Vietnamese pointed, and, you know, I took a little Cicolo ride and got to the naval base. I walked up to the gate, and there were security guys on the gate, the Navy guys, and I said, I need to come in and see if I can get a helicopter down to 4th Battalion Vietnamese Marines. So they said, well, sir, we'll take you to the operations center. So they dragged me to the operations center. I come in, and there's this Navy commander, and he looks at me, and he says, who the hell are you? And I said, well, I'm Second Lieutenant Zinni, and I'm going down to report to the 4th Marine Battalion of Vietnamese Marines. And he said, how did you get here? He said, no, helicopters have come in. I said, I took a bus. He said, what? I said, I took a bus from Saigon down here. He said, are you crazy? It's not safe to take a bus. I said, well, I didn't know. He looked at me and he mumbled something about God protecting idiots and second lieutenants. And I reported to Captain Hoare, and Captain Hoare had been told that this new second lieutenant, the only second lieutenant ever assigned to Vietnamese Marine Advisory Unit, was coming down, and he ensured that the battalion commander was ready for me to have a special dinner, which consisted of duck's blood and peanut soup, and a monkey I saw roasting on a skillet, which is not what they normally ate, but because he knew I'd been through this MATA course where we were told, you know, no matter what you think, eat the food, tell them it's delicious. And I went through all that, you know, told them how great the food was on my first day. Now, I tell that story because I looked at that wall and saw how young we were going in and how innocent we were. And I can tell you stories about my first firefight where I had planned to come up out of my rack at night when the shooting started because they told me it would start that night and we would be attacked. And I came up the wrong way, facing the back of a burnout building, and had a Vietnamese Marine said, turn the other way. That's where they're shooting from. To where we came out years later, first, second tour. I can't believe how much we aged in that time. We were wiser. We lost our innocence in many ways. We came out understanding more about what we went through than our leadership did at that level. I see the same thing now. I'm back from doing an assessment in Afghanistan for a couple of weeks and did one in Iraq, and it's amazing how at the company level, the battalion and the brigade level, they get it. We have problems elsewhere up the chain. And I want to say that when we came out of that war, we may have still been young, but we were wise beyond our years. And for a long time, the advice we gave, not to repeat the mistakes of our senior leadership, the advice we gave held us in good stead until our generation sort of got washed out of the senior leadership. You know, and I think we're creating another generation now. My son is a Marine, just finished his 6th deployment, came back from Afghanistan. And I see this generation is learning the same lessons, and that will hold us in good stead. We came out of that war and rebuilt the finest military in the world. We stood up to the Soviet threat and said, we may have been bloodied in Vietnam, but just try us in the Fulda Gap. And they didn't. They folded. They folded their hand and they walked away and collapsed. We created the greatest economy in the world. We never lost our dignity or our honor. And that's why there are so many people that want to repeat it or copy it or claim it from us, but they can't. There's only about 1/3 of us left who went through that experience, and our numbers are getting smaller and smaller. But I want to tell you, as a member of this generation, we are as much the greatest generation. We are as much the proudest generation. And I say this from uncles and cousins and a father that fought in our previous wars, as any of those that went before us. For us to get together and remember that moment and to know that no one can take away from us what we did, what we went through, and no one can diminish the honor of those we left on that battlefield and take away from them what they did, is what we're all about. So when we have moments like this, when AUSA, when the Marines Memorial decide that we need to come together and remember all that, and make sure all Americans remember that, I think it says something about us as a society. So God bless you, and thank you for your service and all you've done.
have Dave Weeks and his special significant other, and they're going to put on a special little musical tribute to you. And I think Liam's even going to sing a couple of songs. Right, Liam? Yeah, all right. But ladies and gentlemen, enjoy this. Thank you very much.
I hear a voice in the